In Lagos, some marriages don't end with shouting. They end with the sound of a gate closing softly at 1:17 a.m., and a woman pretending she didn't hear it. Inemesit learned to sleep with one ear open, not because she was jealous by nature, but because her home had become a place where truth came in late and left early. Daniel used to be the kind of husband who held her waist in public like a promise, the kind who called her "my head" and meant it. Now he came home smelling like unfamiliar perfume and confidence, dropping his keys like he paid rent in the house. He spoke less, ate less, asked nothing about her day, and somehow still had energy to complain about how she folded his shirts. The irony of it all was almost funny, if it wasn't her life. She would stand in the kitchen staring at the pot, thinking, so this is how a woman becomes lonely inside marriage, not by losing the man, but by losing his eyes. Before the coldness grew teeth, Inemesit tried everything that respectable women are advised to try. She reduced her tone. She increased her prayer. She cooked his favorites. She stopped asking questions that made him slam doors. She even laughed at his jokes that were not jokes, those ones that cut like razor blades and then pretend they are toothbrushes. Daniel's new lifestyle arrived like a guest that refused to greet her. Expensive tastes, late nights, sudden meetings, and the kind of phone privacy that made him hold his device like it was a newborn baby. When she asked gently, he would sigh like she was asking him to donate a kidney. "Must you interrogate me?" he'd say, with a voice that made wife sound like police officer. Inemesit would swallow her words, because swallowing had become her daily meal. She wasn't weak, she was hoping. Hoping is a stubborn thing. Still, the body knows when it is being disrespected. Some mornings, Inemesit would stand by the mirror and catch herself adjusting her wrapper with the seriousness of a woman preparing for battle. Except the battle was always silent. She would remember the early days, how Daniel begged for her hand, how he promised her mother he would protect her, how he couldn't even eat if she hadn't served him first. Now, he could eat her piece for breakfast and still ask for more. She began writing down small things, not evidence, not documents, just memories she didn't want to gaslight herself out of. Dates, words, how many times he called her dramatic, how many times he apologized without changing. She told herself, I am not crazy. I am not imagining it. And on days when she still found a tiny laugh, it was bitter humor. So marriage is now a subscription service, she muttered once, and I'm paying monthly with patience. The first time Inemesit saw Sheila, it wasn't in a restaurant or at a loud party where people came to display their sins with music. It was in her own living room, quiet, clean, familiar, where Betrayal had no business wearing slippers. Inemesit returned from the market earlier than planned because rain threatened and she didn't want her tomatoes to soften in the heat. She opened the door and froze. A young woman sat on the couch, legs crossed, scrolling calmly, as if she had been assigned that seat by destiny. Sheila looked up slowly, eyes moving over Inemesit's face the way someone inspects fabric, measuring value, deciding if it's worth anything. Oh, Sheila said, smiling like she knew a secret. You're back early. Not hello. Not sorry. Just a statement that sounded like the house had a schedule she was in charge of. Daniel appeared from a hallway with that careless confidence men carry when they think a woman's anger is just noise. Inemesit, he said, as if he was introducing a coworker. This is Sheila. She's helping me with something. Helping him? With what? With disrespect? With turning a home into a theater? Inemesit looked at his face, waiting for shame to show up the way it used to. Nothing. Sheila stood up and did a small nod, like a queen greeting a servant. Nice to finally meet you, she said, dragging the words like they were too heavy for her mouth. Inemesit's throat tightened, not because she lacked words, but because she had too many, and she didn't know which one would keep her dignity intact. From that day, Sheila began to appear like a bad dream that refused to end in the morning. Sometimes she came to drop something. Sometimes she came to help Daniel. Sometimes Inemesit would return from errands and find evidence of Sheila's presence. A perfume trail, a lipstick cup, a laugh from the kitchen that didn't belong to her. And the worst part wasn't even Sheila's boldness, it was Daniel's comfort. He acted like his wife was the visitor and his mistress was the resident. When Inemesit protested, Daniel would accuse her of overthinking. He would say, "You're too insecure," in the same mouth that was creating the insecurity. Sheila, meanwhile, mastered the art of insulting with politeness. "Auntie, you should rest," she once said sweetly, when a nemesis questioned why she was serving Daniel food in their kitchen. Auntie. A nemesis wasn't old. But Sheila used that word the way you use salt on a wound. Enough to sting, not enough to be questioned. Nemesis tried to keep the matter private, because a woman raised properly doesn't drag her home outside. But there are some things you can't hide, not even with wrapper and composure. Neighbors began noticing Sheila's visits. The security man greeted Sheila too freely. Even the compound's children started calling Daniel uncle that has 2 wives, laughing innocently. Nemesis wanted to scream, but her pride refused to give the neighborhood that entertainment. Instead, she started watching, quietly, carefully, learning the pattern of their disrespect. And when she finally looked at herself in the mirror that night, she whispered, Nemesis, if you keep quiet like this, they will rename you doormat, and your own family will start believing it. Nemesis did not run to people at the first sign of trouble. She carried it like a woman carries water, balanced on her head with steady steps, even when her neck ached. But one evening, after Daniel returned at midnight and walked past her like she was part of the wall, she sat on the bed and decided she was tired of suffering alone. She called Daniel's elder sister, the one who liked giving advice, in long voice notes. Nemesis didn't shout. She didn't insult. She explained calmly. The late nights, the mistress' boldness, the disrespect inside the house. The sister sighed and said, "My dear, men are like that. Don't let small girl push you out of your marriage." Small girl. As if Sheila was a mosquito and Nemesis was the one expected to keep scratching quietly. She tried again, this time calling Daniel's mother. The older woman listened with that kind of silence that feels like judgment. Then she said, Nemesis, be wise. A woman keeps her home. No questions about her son's behavior. No shock that a mistress was entering her son's house openly. Just that one sentence that women have been using to bury other women for generations. Keep your home. Nemesis wanted to ask, so who keeps me? But she swallowed it, because she had learned that some people don't want the truth. They want you to endure quietly, so they can continue calling your endurance virtue. When Nemesis hung up, she laughed once short, dry. "So I should keep the home," she muttered, "while your son is renting it out emotionally." Then she reached out to Sheila's side too, not with pride, but with desperation. She didn't know Sheila's family well, but she got a contact through a mutual person and called. The response was worse. "Maybe Daniel promised her marriage," the woman said casually. Like that made it acceptable. "Maybe you people are not compatible." Compatible? Nemesis' chest tightened. She realized something ugly. People had been hearing her complaints, but they were choosing comfort over confrontation. Nobody wanted to enter the matter. Everybody wanted the story to stay where it was, inside Nemesis' chest, so they could sleep well. She began to feel like a person drowning while people argue on the shore about whether the water is deep. Daniel noticed her calls and reacted with anger, not guilt. One morning, he snatched her phone and threw it on the bed. "You want to disgrace me?" he barked. "You want to turn my family against me?" Nemesis stared at him. "You're already disgracing yourself," she said softly, but her voice shook. Daniel laughed, an ugly laugh that carried no joy. "See you," he replied. "You think anybody will fight for you? Everybody knows you complain too much." That statement hit her like a slap because it contained the truth of what they had done to her. They had turned her pain into a personality flaw. Nemesis sat down slowly, like her legs had forgotten how to stand. And for the first time, she thought, if nobody will fight for me, then my family must see this with their own eyes. The day the argument finally broke open, it started with something small, always something small, like the universe enjoys insulting women with minor reasons for major pain. Nemesis returned from the kitchen and found Sheila sitting on the armchair in a new wrapper, one of Nemesis' own wrappers, tied with confidence. The wrapper looked different on her, like theft dressed as fashion. Nemesis stopped in the doorway, holding a tray, her fingers turning cold. "That's my wrapper," she said quietly. Sheila smiled without warmth. "It's just cloth. she replied, stretching her legs slightly, as if she wanted to show she could wear more than cloth. She could wear disrespect too. Daniel entered and saw the tension. Nemesis expected him to correct it, to say, "Sheila, remove that." Instead, he sighed like his wife was disturbing his peace. "Nemesis, leave it," he said. "Why do you like drama?" "Drama." Nemesis' eyes widened. The word tasted bitter. "So it's drama that another woman is wearing my things inside my house?" she asked, voice rising. Daniel's face hardened. "This is why I'm tired," he snapped. "Everyday problem. Everyday complaint. Can you just be normal?" Nemesis laughed once, shocked by the audacity. "Normal? Daniel, what is normal about this?" She pointed at Sheila, who was now watching like a spectator at a match. "You brought her here. You let her disrespect me. And you call me the problem." Sheila clapped slowly, mocking applause. "Auntie, breathe," she said, sweetly cruel. "Shouting won't make him love you." That sentence landed like petrol on fire. Nemesis turned fully toward Sheila, rage and heartbreak mixing in her chest until she couldn't separate them. "Love," Nemesis said. "This is not love. This is wickedness." Sheila stood up, walking closer, her smile sharpening. "If you were doing your job," Sheila murmured, "another woman wouldn't be here." Daniel didn't correct her. He didn't defend his wife. He watched, eyes half-lidded, as if he was judging whose words were more entertaining. The argument grew teeth. Daniel began listing Nemesis' faults, as if he had been waiting years to finally unload them. She was too soft, too prayerful, too quiet, too village, too unserious. He said it like being kind was a crime. Nemesis' mouth trembled. "So my kindness is your excuse to shame me?" she asked. Daniel stepped forward, face close. "I'm the man here," he said sharply. "If I want peace, I will create peace." Nemesis stared at him, seeing him differently, like a stranger wearing her husband's face. She realized the argument wasn't about Sheila or rappers. It was about power. Daniel wanted her small. Sheila wanted her erased. And both of them wanted her to accept it quietly. But Nemesis' heart, tired as it was, refused to die politely. After the shouting, the room didn't return to normal. It returned to something worse, cold, ugly calm, like the silence after thunder when you know the rain is coming. Nemesis' hands began shaking. She had spoken, finally. She had defended herself. Yet she felt no victory, only exhaustion. Daniel sat down and picked up his phone like the conversation had been about traffic. Sheila returned to the couch and began adjusting the wrapper again, slowly, deliberately, as if she wanted Nemesis to see that nothing she said had moved them. Nemesis stood in the middle of the room, feeling like she was shrinking while they expanded. Her eyes burned. "Daniel," she said softly, "I don't want to fight. I just want respect." Daniel didn't look up. "Respect is earned," he replied. The cruelty of that sentence almost made her laugh, because she had earned everything in that marriage. The cooking, the patience, the loyalty, the silence. Yet somehow, the only thing she couldn't earn was basic humanity. Nemesis' legs felt weak. She sat, then stood again, then sat again, restless, desperate. She remembered the advice people gave. Be calm. Don't provoke him. Be wise. But what is wisdom when your heart is being stepped on daily? She tried one more time, not as a fighter, but as a woman who still believed vows had meaning. She walked toward Daniel, voice trembling. "Remember when you begged my mother," she whispered. "Remember when you said you'd never embarrass me?" Daniel finally looked at her, eyes cold. "Stop reminding me of the past," he said. Sheila scoffed loudly. And here we go again," she murmured, rolling her eyes like Nemesis' pain was a boring movie. That did it. Nemesis' strength cracked. Tears came fast, humiliating and hot. Her voice broke. "I'm begging you," she said. "Not for love. Just for dignity. Don't do this to me." And then slowly, like she couldn't believe her body was doing it, Nemesis dropped to her knees. Not because she thought kneeling was magic, but because her spirit had been pushed so far it was searching for any position that might soften Daniel's heart. She clasped her hands, crying openly now, shame mixing with desperation. The tiles were cold against her skin. Her wrapper pooled around her. "Please," she sobbed, "please. Stop letting her treat me like trash. Daniel stared at her, as if she was performing. He didn't move. He didn't reach for her. His silence was louder than a slap. Sheila stood up slowly, her face twisting with irritation, taking one step forward as if she was tired of the crying. Innemesset looked up, eyes swollen, still pleading, unaware that the next moment would become the one the whole neighborhood would whisper about for years. Innemesset was still on her knees when the air in the room changed, like the ceiling fan suddenly stopped and even the walls held their breath. Her crying wasn't dramatic. It was the kind that comes when a woman has tried every respectable method to save her dignity and now has nothing left but raw honesty. She held her hands together, pleading softly, saying words like please and I beg you, the way people say prayers when they have run out of options. Daniel stood there with a face that didn't move, a body that didn't lean toward her, as though emotions were now somebody else's job. The way he looked at her wasn't hatred, it was worse, indifference, the kind that tells a person, you can break in front of me, and I will still check my phone. Sheila, meanwhile, paced like someone irritated by noise. She kept sighing and rolling her eyes, tapping her nails against her palm, the impatience of a person who wanted the scene to end but didn't want to be the villain, until she remembered she didn't care about being a villain. Sheila stepped forward, close enough for Innemesset to smell her perfume, sweet, loud, confident, the kind that announces, I take what I want. Innemesset looked up, her eyes red, her lips trembling, thinking maybe Sheila would at least walk away. But Sheila's face tightened with annoyance, and she spoke with that poisonous calm some people use when they want to humiliate you without raising their voice. Get up, she said. You're doing too much. Innemesset shook her head slowly, not stubbornly, but because she was trying to hold on to the last piece of herself that still believed she belonged somewhere. This is my husband, she whispered, and that sentence, small, desperate, seemed to insult Sheila more than shouting would. The next second happened fast. Sheila's foot moved, not as an accident, not as a slip, but as a deliberate act meant to reduce a woman into a thing. Innemesset cried out and tipped sideways, her wrapper shifting, her palms scraping the tile as she tried to catch herself, shame and shock flooding her face at once. The room didn't explode into chaos the way movies do. It became colder. Daniel flinched, just once, like a man whose conscience tried to stand up but got tired immediately. His mouth opened as if he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. He stood there like a spectator, like a coward who didn't want blood on his hands but didn't mind dirt on his wife. Sheila straightened, breathing like she had just corrected a problem, and for half a second, the smugness returned to her eyes, as if she had finally confirmed her rank in the house. Innemesset lay there stunned, not injured in some dramatic way, but humiliated in a way that sinks into the soul, the kind of humiliation that stays even after bruises fade. She swallowed hard, tasting salt and disbelief, and the only thought that came was, he watched. He watched her do it. In that moment, something snapped quietly inside her, something that had been holding her together with patience and faith and cultural endurance. And outside, beyond the walls, that single cry did what secrets always do when pushed too far. It escaped. What Innemesset didn't know was that earlier that day, her mother had been uneasy in the way only mothers can be, uneasy without evidence, uneasy without proof, just a persistent tug in the chest that refuses to go away. Innemesset had not called back. Her voice had been strange the last time she spoke, too careful, too controlled. The way a person talks when someone is listening beside them. And when her mother asked, are you okay? Innemesset had answered too quickly, I'm fine, Mama. Fine. That word had sounded like a lie wrapped in politeness. So her mother sent Chaik with a small bag of food and a simple instruction. Go and see your sister with your eyes, not with phone calls. Chaik wasn't coming to fight, he was coming to check. He drove into the compound with that anxious impatience of an elder brother who has been trying not to overreact, who has been telling himself, maybe it's normal couple things, while his spirit keeps whispering, something is wrong. The compound gate wasn't properly locked, a small careless detail that would become the doorway for consequences. Chaik stepped in, calling Innemesset's name in a normal voice at first, but the house answered with silence. He moved closer, hearing muffled voices inside, Daniel's low tone, Sheila's sharper one, and then suddenly he heard it, A cry that didn't sound like argument, didn't sound like disagreement, but sounded like a person being reduced. It wasn't long. It wasn't repeated. Just one sharp, broken sound that cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Chike stopped walking. His whole body tightened. The world narrowed. He didn't need an explanation anymore. The cry explained enough. He turned back toward the gate and signaled quickly, because he hadn't come alone. The uncle had followed behind in another car, not because anyone expected drama, but because their family didn't treat a woman's silence like a minor issue. The cousins were there too, grown men with that quiet readiness Nigerians have when they sense disgrace has entered a home. They approached the door without banging, without announcing war. Chike pushed it open and stepped inside, and what he saw rearranged something in his mind permanently. His sister on the floor, her face wet, her eyes wide with shame. Sheila standing with that posture of someone who had just won. Daniel nearby, not helping, not apologizing, simply existing as if nothing serious had happened. For a moment, nobody spoke because even words felt too small for what they were witnessing. Chike's jaw clenched so hard it ached, and the uncle's expression didn't change, not rage, not panic, just a calm so deep it was frightening. Innemesset looked up and saw them, and the relief that flooded her face wasn't joy. It was the relief of someone who has been drowning quietly and finally sees land. The kind of relief that says, "Thank God. Somebody saw it. Somebody heard it." Innemesset's mother entered last, and she didn't run like people expected her to. She walked, slow, steady, wrapper tied firmly, head high, eyes sharp with the kind of disappointment that doesn't need shouting to injure. The moment she crossed the threshold, the entire house felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were ashamed. Sheila's face shifted immediately. That smug confidence began to crack because she recognized something she hadn't prepared for. Elders who were not coming to beg. Daniel's posture changed too. His shoulders sank slightly, his mouth dried up, because men like him often feel brave only when the audience is one tired wife. Chike moved quickly to Innemesset, helping her sit up with gentleness that made the humiliation sting less. "Annie, are you okay?" he asked softly, and Innemesset tried to answer, but her throat blocked with tears, because now that her family was here, her body finally felt safe enough to release what it had been holding in. Nobody rushed to fight immediately. That was the strange part, the part that made the room terrifying. Instead, there was a short silence that felt like judgment being calculated. The uncle looked around slowly, not at furniture, but at the energy of the place, as if he was reading the story from the air. He asked one question, calm and clear: "What happened here?" Daniel opened his mouth as if he had an explanation ready, but the uncle lifted a finger, not in threat, but in command, and Daniel's voice died. Sheila tried to talk instead. She tried to laugh it off. "It's just misunderstanding," she said, waving her hand as if. Innemesset's tears were a spill on the floor, but the mother's eyes turned to her, steady, heavy, and Sheila's words began to stumble. Innemesset's mother didn't insult her. She didn't call her names. She just said, "Young lady, don't speak as if you are in your father's sitting room." The way she said it, quiet, controlled, made Sheila swallow hard. Then Sheila made a mistake. She looked toward the door. Not at Innemesset, not at the mother. The door. Her body angled slightly like she was measuring distance. The fear finally arrived in her eyes because she understood that this was no longer a scene where she could bully one crying woman and walk out proudly. The moment she shifted, the uncle stepped closer, not aggressively, just positioning himself like a wall that had decided to become human. Chike's cousins moved too, not in chaos, but in coordination, the way people move when they're protecting someone, not when they're showing off. Innemesset's mother remained still, watching it all, and for the first time, Innemesset realized something. Her family didn't need to shout. Their presence alone was already changing the air. And Sheila, who had been so bold 5 minutes earlier, suddenly looked like a trapped animal in expensive perfume. Sheila's instincts took over. She turned sharply and tried to move toward the door as if speed could erase what she had just done. It wasn't even about bravery anymore. It was about survival, about escaping the shame before it swallowed her whole. "I'm going," she muttered, voice suddenly thin, and she reached for the handle. But the uncle's hand landed on the door first. Not on her. Not to harm her. Just on the door, claiming it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Sit, he said to Sheila. The same way a teacher speaks to a student who has crossed a line and now must face consequences. Sheila's breath hitched. She tried another angle, turning to Daniel like he could rescue her. But Daniel's face was pale and confused. He looked like a man whose two-life arrangement had finally collapsed into one ugly reality. Nemesis watched it all with trembling hands, feeling something new rising beneath the tears. It wasn't revenge yet. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. She saw Sheila's cowardice and realized the boldness had been borrowed from Daniel's permission. She saw Daniel's silence and realized it wasn't neutrality, it was partnership. The room filled with small movements. Chike guiding Nemesis to sit properly. One cousin placing himself near the hallway. The mother stepping closer to her daughter without rushing, as if she was letting Nemesis decide how much comfort she wanted. Then the uncle spoke again, still calm. Nobody is leaving until we understand what we walked into. That sentence landed like a padlock. Sheila's lips began to shake. She attempted to protest, "You can't hold me here," but her voice lacked conviction, because deep down she knew she had walked into someone's marriage and acted like a ruler. Now the real owners of Nemesis' life had arrived, and her confidence had no place to sit. Daniel tried to regain control the only way weak men do, by turning to his wife. Nemesis, tell them to calm down, he said, as if she was still responsible for making things peaceful. Nemesis stared at him, stunned by the audacity. Even now, after watching her on the floor, he still wanted her to manage the damage he caused. Her mother answered for her not harshly, just firmly. She will not speak until she is ready. Daniel blinked. He had never heard someone protect Nemesis like that in front of him, not with fists, not with drama, but with authority. Sheila shifted again, eyes darting around the room, looking for sympathy. But there was none. The cousins' faces were stone. Chike's expression was controlled fury. The uncle's calm was the most frightening thing in the room, because calm like that usually means someone is thinking, not reacting. And Sheila realized, too late, that she had kicked the wrong woman in the wrong house at the wrong time. The door clicked, locked, not as a threat, but as a decision. It was the kind of small sound that announces a bigger reality. This matter would not be escaped. Sheila's eyes widened at the sound, and for a second her bravado tried to return. "Open this door," she demanded, voice rising, but it sounded forced, like a person acting strong while drowning. The uncle looked at her the way adults look at childish tantrums, patient, unimpressed. "You used your leg on a married woman," he said, slow and clear. "Now you want to use your mouth to escape." Sheila's face flushed. Daniel stepped forward, palms out, attempting that fake diplomacy men use when trouble catches them. "Uncle, let's talk calmly," he began, but the uncle turned his gaze to him, quiet, heavy, and Daniel's words evaporated. "You watched," the uncle said. 2 words, simple, deadly. Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Nemesis' mother didn't shout. She just stared at Daniel, as if she was seeing the true shape of him for the first time. Chike remained near Nemesis, his voice low as he asked her, "Did she touch you?" Nemesis nodded slowly, tears still falling, and that nod felt like a seal on a file that had been open for too long. Her mother finally sat beside her, not to cry with her, but to anchor her. She placed a hand on Nemesis' back, steady, warm, and Nemesis' breathing slowly returned from panic to rhythm. The uncle pulled a chair and sat, as if they had all the time in the world. That was when Sheila truly understood fear. Because when people are angry, they rush. When they sit, they are planning. "We will ask questions," the uncle said. "You will answer. If you lie, you will regret it." Sheila's mouth opened, then closed. Daniel's knees looked weak. The whole house felt like a courtroom without wigs. The questioning began gently and became sharper, not with insults, but with truth. "Who invited her? How long has she been coming here? Has this happened before?" Daniel tried to dodge, tried to reduce it to couple misunderstanding, but every time he minimized it, Nemesis' mother's eyes hardened, and the uncle's tone grew colder. Sheila attempted to blame Nemesis, she provoked me. But Chike cut in, voice shaking with contained rage. So you provoked her by kicking her while she was crying? The contradiction embarrassed Sheila into silence. Outside, neighbors began to sense something was happening. Footsteps in the compound, a faint murmuring beyond the gate, the soft curiosity of Legos compounds where secrets never last. Inside, Nemesis wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper and realized something else. This was no longer about begging Daniel. That era had ended on the tile floor. Now, the story had shifted into consequences, and the people who had ignored her pain before were about to learn how loud truth becomes when witnesses finally arrive. What followed was not chaos, not the kind of wild violence people imagine when anger takes over, but something far more terrifying, controlled punishment. Daniel and Sheila were not allowed to leave the house. Time slowed, stretching into hours, then into night, then into another day. They were not screamed at endlessly. Instead, they were confronted repeatedly, forced to face what they had done without the comfort of escape or denial. Sleep came in fragments. Hunger gnawed. Fear settled deep. Every attempt to speak their way out of it was shut down with silence or a firm command to listen. The family did not act like criminals. They acted like people delivering judgment in a language both Daniel and Sheila finally understood, the language of consequence. Nemesis was not present for most of it. That was intentional. Her family made sure she did not have to watch what followed. Justice, they believed, should not further stain the victim. Daniel's confidence evaporated completely. The man who once stood tall, while his wife cried, now struggled to meet anyone's eyes. He was confronted again and again with one simple truth. You failed as a husband, as a man, and as a human being. He was reminded, calmly, relentlessly, of the promises he made, the warnings he ignored, the complaints he dismissed as nagging. Each reminder landed heavier than blows ever could. Sheila, on the other hand, learned a different lesson. The boldness that fueled her cruelty dissolved into terror. She cried, begged, apologized repeatedly, her voice hoarse and desperate. The same mouth that mocked Nemesis now pleaded for mercy, promising never to come near the marriage again, swearing she didn't know it would go this far. But remorse discovered too late is a poor currency. By the second day, both of them were exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. They no longer argued. They no longer defended themselves. They simply endured. The family made it clear this was not revenge for entertainment. It was reckoning. A reckoning meant to burn into memory, so deeply that neither of them would ever forget what crossing certain lines could cost. When it finally ended, Daniel and Sheila looked nothing like the people who had humiliated Nemesis. They looked smaller, broken, humbled in a way that could not be undone by time alone. On the morning of the third day, when the house finally felt still again, the uncle gathered Daniel and Sheila in the living room. Nemesis was still not there. This part, the uncle said, was not for her. It was for the truth. He spoke slowly, deliberately, ensuring every word landed exactly where it should. What happened here, he said, will never leave this house through your mouth. Daniel nodded quickly, too quickly, eager to agree to anything that would end his suffering. Sheila nodded too, tears streaking her face, fear still clinging to her like a shadow. But agreement alone was not enough. They were made to repeat it, out loud, clearly, that they would never boast, never threaten, never twist the story to make themselves victims. Silence, the uncle reminded them, was the price of mercy. Daniel tried to speak, tried to promise reform, repentance, sudden love for his wife, but he was stopped. You've spoken enough for years, the uncle said flatly. Now you will be quiet. That command cut deeper than any punishment. Daniel realized, perhaps for the first time, that words had lost their power over this situation. Sheila was shaking openly now, understanding that whatever illusion of control she once had was gone forever. She was told plainly that if a single rumor surfaced, if a single attempt was made to shame Nemesis or rewrite the narrative, the consequences would return, worse, louder, public. Sheila swore repeatedly, her voice cracking, promising silence, obedience, disappearance. The confidence she once wore like jewelry had been stripped completely. When the agreement was done, it didn't feel victorious. It felt heavy, final. The kind of finality that closes one chapter of life and opens another filled with regret. Daniel sat there staring at the floor, the reality sinking in that his actions had not only destroyed his marriage, but also erased his dignity. Sheila understood something else entirely. She had mistaken access for authority, desire for power, and cruelty for strength. And now the bill had arrived. They were not allowed to gather themselves with pride. There was no time to strategize, no opportunity to save face. Daniel was told to pack only what he could carry. No arguments. No negotiation. Sheila was instructed to leave separately. Her path out deliberately different, deliberately lonely. When they stepped outside, the compound felt different. Neighbors were already watching. Whispers floated like smoke. No one needed details. The energy alone told the story. Daniel walked with his head down, a single bag in his hand. Shoulders slumped under the weight of disgrace. The same man who once strutted through the compound with entitlement now avoided eye contact like a child caught stealing. Sheila's exit was worse. She tried to cover her face, but shame has a way of making itself visible no matter how much you hide. People stared. Some shook their heads. Others murmured quietly. Nobody defended her. Nobody followed her. She had entered the house boldly, laughing, mocking, claiming space that wasn't hers. She left it like someone fleeing a bad dream, alone, shaken, erased. The family made no effort to soften the scene. Consequences, they believed, should be seen. Not dramatized, but witnessed. Let the environment remember. Let the lesson travel faster than gossip. Nemesis watched from inside, standing beside her mother. She did not feel joy. She did not feel revenge. What she felt was something quieter and stronger. Closure. The humiliation that once pinned her to the floor no longer owned her. Her body stood upright now. Her breathing was steady. Her mother squeezed her hand gently, not in celebration, but in reassurance. "You're safe," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, Nemesis believed it. Silence did not mean surrender. Once Daniel and Sheila were gone, Nemesis' family shifted focus, not backward, not toward what had already been done, but forward, toward justice that could not be undone. With support on both sides, Nemesis finally did what fear had stopped her from doing for years. She spoke officially. She reported the abuse, the emotional cruelty, the assault, the neglect. She did not exaggerate. She did not decorate the truth. She simply told it clearly, consistently, supported by witnesses who had seen enough to stand firm. For the first time, her complaints were not brushed aside as marital issues. They were recorded, taken seriously, treated as what they were, crimes. Daniel was arrested first. The shock on his face when officers approached him was almost surreal. He had believed silence meant protection. He had believed power meant immunity. He was wrong. Sheila was arrested soon after. Her tears returned, louder this time, but they fell on ears trained to ignore manipulation. Statements were taken. Medical reports reviewed. Witness accounts aligned. The system moved slowly, but it moved surely. Nemesis sat through it all with a calm she didn't recognize in herself, a calm built from survival and truth finally finding oxygen. When the news spread, reactions came quickly. Some people were shocked. Others pretended they had always known. But Nemesis didn't care anymore. She had crossed a point of no return. This was no longer about shame. It was about accountability. And for the first time since her marriage began cracking, she felt something unfamiliar but powerful rising in her chest. Relief. Daniel's family came first, voices trembling, tone apologetic, faces arranged into expressions of regret. They pleaded. They begged. They asked for forgiveness for the sake of peace. Sheila's family followed with similar desperation, claiming ignorance, claiming surprise, claiming they never imagined it would go this far. Nemesis listened to all of them without interrupting. When they finished, she spoke calmly, her voice steady and unshaking. She reminded them, one by one, that she had complained before, that she had cried before, that she had warned them, and that they had all chosen silence when it was convenient. "You don't get to be loud now," she said softly, "because you were quiet when it mattered." The court proceedings were unforgiving. Daniel was charged more heavily. His position as husband, his repeated abuse, his failure to protect instead of harm all weighed against him. His sentence was longer. Sheila was convicted too, punished for a role, but her time was shorter. The imbalance was intentional. The law recognized what Innemesset had always known. The greatest betrayal came from the man who vowed to protect her. When the judgment was read, Daniel did not look at Innemesset. He couldn't. Shame had finally settled where arrogance once lived. After everything, after prison, after court, after humiliation, Daniel tried to return. He stood at the gate one evening like a ghost of his former self. But the house no longer recognized him. He was legally evicted, removed completely, because the home he once ruled did not belong to him. It belonged to Innemesset. Watching him leave that final time felt different. This time, there were no tears, no shouting, just a woman standing in her own space, finally untouched by fear. The house was quiet again, but this silence was earned. The courtroom was quieter than Innemesset expected. She had imagined noise, arguments, maybe drama that matched the years of pain she carried, but instead there was a heavy stillness that pressed against her chest. Daniel stood in the dock looking older than his age, stripped of the confidence that once made him cruel. When the judge spoke, the words were measured and firm, listing Daniel's repeated abuse, his failure to protect, his complicity, and the way he used silence as a weapon. Each charge landed like a stamp on paper, official, permanent. Sheila stood apart, eyes lowered, her earlier arrogance now replaced with a nervous stiffness that betrayed how unprepared she was for consequences that could not be flirted away or shouted down. The sentence came without ceremony. Daniel's punishment was longer, heavier, and unmistakably deliberate. The court acknowledged what everyone had finally accepted, that the deepest damage came from betrayal inside marriage, not from intrusion outside it. Sheila received her sentence too, shorter but firm, enough to ensure the memory of that house would never leave her. Innemesset did not smile. She did not cry. She sat still, absorbing the finality of it all. Justice, she realized, does not always feel victorious. It often feels exhausting, like finally setting down a load you didn't realize you had been carrying for years. As Daniel was led away, he finally looked at Innemesset, not with anger, not with entitlement, with regret, so late it almost felt insulting. Innemesset met his gaze calmly and then looked away, because some chapters do not deserve rereading. She stood up slowly, her mother beside her, her brother behind her, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the sun hit her face, bright and unforgiving, and she breathed deeply. The world had not ended. It had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something she could enter without fear. The visits started quietly, one after the other, as if coordinated by guilt. Daniel's relatives came first, speaking softly, apologizing loudly, carrying shame wrapped in polite language. They said words like mistake, pressure, and misunderstanding, hoping those words could soften years of neglect. Sheila's family followed later, eyes avoiding contact, voices trembling with embarrassment rather than empathy. They pleaded not with anger, but with desperation, asking Innemesset to forgive, to withdraw complaints, to let sleeping dogs lie. Each plea sounded rehearsed, as if regret had only become fashionable once consequences arrived. Innemesset listened. That alone shocked them. She did not interrupt or raise her voice. When they finished, she reminded them gently, but firmly, that she had come to them before, that she had complained when it was uncomfortable, when silence could have prevented disgrace. She told them how they had dismissed her, advised patience, and protected peace at the expense of her safety. "You told me to endure," she said quietly. "I endured. Now you must respect the outcome." Her calm unsettled them more than shouting ever could. They realized too late that forgiveness begged for after justice feels different from forgiveness offered before damage is done. The families left one by one, empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Nemesis watched them go without bitterness. She had learned something crucial. Forgiveness is not denial of harm. It is a choice made freely, not under pressure. And she was not ready to give it. Not yet, maybe not ever. That realization did not make her cruel. It made her honest. She returned inside her house, closed the door gently, and leaned against it for a moment. Her life was no longer governed by other people's comfort. For the first time, she was choosing herself without apology. Daniel returned months later, thinner, quieter, carrying the weight of confinement on his shoulders. He stood at the gate as if memory alone could grant him access. The house looked the same, but it no longer responded to him. When he asked to speak, the security man hesitated, not out of cruelty, but uncertainty, until Nemesis stepped forward herself. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply informed him that his presence there was no longer permitted. The eviction papers had already been processed. The house was hers alone. His chapter in that space had ended. Daniel tried to argue, his voice cracking under desperation. He spoke of change, of lessons learned, of time served. Nemesis listened with the same calm she had mastered over months of rebuilding. Some lessons, she said quietly, come after loss, not before restoration. There was no bitterness in her tone, only truth. Daniel realized then that prison had not been his greatest punishment. Irrelevance was. He gathered himself slowly and left, not escorted this time, not chased, just erased from a life he once ruled with entitlement. Nemesis stood in the compound long after he disappeared from view. She felt no triumph, only release. The space around her felt lighter, as though the walls themselves were exhaling. She turned back toward the house, touched the doorframe, and stepped inside. This was not the home where she had knelt and cried. This was a home reclaimed. And for the first time, it felt entirely hers, not just legally, but spiritually. Stories have a way of settling into places, and the neighborhood never forgot that house. People spoke in lowered tones when they passed it, not out of fear of a nemesis, but out of respect for what had unfolded there. It became an unspoken reference point, a reminder that abuse hidden behind walls eventually finds witnesses. Nemesis noticed how greetings changed, how people looked at her differently now. Not with pity, with recognition. She was no longer the quiet woman enduring silently. She was the woman who survived and stood firm. Children played freely again in the compound, laughter returning to corners once heavy with tension. Life resumed its rhythm, but the lesson lingered. Men became careful with their words. Women became bolder in theirs. The house did not need to announce its history. The air carried it. Nemesis observed it all quietly, understanding that impact does not always roar. Sometimes it settles, reshaping behavior without asking permission. At night, when the house was quiet, Nemesis would sit alone and reflect, not on pain, but on growth. She understood now that survival is not just about leaving danger. It is about refusing to shrink afterward. The neighborhood had learned. She had learned. And the silence that once suffocated her had transformed into peace. Nemesis rebuilt slowly, intentionally, without spectacle. She returned to routines she once abandoned, rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried under endurance. Mornings became hers again. Decisions were hers alone. There was no one to tiptoe around, no fear of provocation. Her strength was no longer reactive. It was settled, grounded, unshakable. She did not need to announce her healing. It showed in her posture, her voice, her choices. Sometimes people asked if she regretted not forgiving sooner, not reconciling, not choosing peace the way society prefers. Nemesis would smile gently and say nothing, because peace chosen at the expense of dignity is not peace, it is surrender. She had surrendered once, and it had nearly destroyed her. Never again. Her silence now was not fear. It was sovereignty. On quiet evenings, she would stand by her window, watching the compound breathe, and feel gratitude, not for suffering, but for survival. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. That a woman's worth does not increase because she endures pain, but because she refuses to accept it as her destiny. Nemesis would never kneel again, not to cruelty, not to silence, not to anyone who mistook her patience for permission. The story ended where it should have begun, with a woman standing firmly in her own life. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.